I want you to imagine, just for a second, standing in absolute darkness. And I don't just mean prehistory. I mean before the concept of India even existed as a
Right,
landmass.
before there were borders or countries or anything like that, just the
Yeah.
raw earth sort of, preparing itself.
Exactly. And from that dark, violent geological beginning, fast forward to a sprawling metropolis, like the size of Western Europe.
Hmm.
It's got multi-story homes, sophisticated indoor plumbing, rigidly planned grid streets. And now, imagine that this massive, hyper-organized society existed 4,000 years ago.
Which is just wild to think about.
It really is. They had no kings, they left behind absolutely no evidence of war, and then they just completely vanished
Yeah.
without a single trace.
Yeah, I mean, it honestly sounds like the setup for a sci-fi novel, because we naturally assume that history is this straight upward line of progress.
Right, like we're always getting better.
Exactly. That ancient people were primitive, and we are the absolute pinnacle of urban sophistication.
Mm.
But the reality that's buried under the dust of the Indian subcontinent, it completely shatters that assumption.
It really does. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are taking an absolute mountain of source material today: geological surveys, ancient climate models, archaeological dig reports, cutting edge genetic sequencing, and we're using all of it to reconstruct the genesis of the Indian subcontinent and its very first human inhabitants.
It's a massive scope.
It is. And our mission today isn't just to recite a timeline. I mean, nobody wants that. We are going to explore the literal physical collision of continents. We're going to examine the brutal daily survival mechanics of the first humans to walk into this terrain.
And of course, we're going to unpack the engineering secrets of that 4,000-year-old civilization you just mentioned.
Yes. A civilization that was, honestly, in terms of urban planning and public hygiene, arguably way smarter and more organized than some of the cities you and I live in today.
Which, forces a really uncomfortable mirror onto our own society. We're going to look at how these ancient people engineered their environment, the highly complex, totally decentralized systems they built to govern themselves, and the really profound, chilling mystery of why they ultimately collapsed.
And what their silent disappearance means for you. Because, and this is the crazy part, the modern conveniences you rely on daily, like the concept of saving for the future, the logistics of global trade, even just having covered urban drainage, these aren't modern inventions.
That at all.
They have roots that stretch back tens of thousands of years right into the soil of this specific region.
Exactly. To truly understand the societal systems we rely on, you basically have to strip away the present completely. You have to start with the raw mechanics of a planet in absolute turmoil.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's rewind the clock, like way back. The geological sources place us roughly 4.54 billion years ago.
Right, when the Earth is essentially just a cooling fireball.
Yeah. But if we fast forward to when land masses are actually recognizable, the map looks absolutely nothing like the globe we know today. I mean,
Yeah.
the Indian subcontinent, this massive landmass that currently houses over 1 billion people, was nowhere near Asia.
No, it was firmly attached to a supercontinent called Gondwana.
Gondwana.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you were looking at a satellite projection of the Earth during that era, you'd see the crust that makes up modern-day India locked tightly into this giant jigsaw puzzle, alongside what we now call Africa, Antarctica, and Australia.
Wow.
They were clustered way deep in the southern hemisphere, but the Earth's lithosphere, its rigid outer shell, is fractured into these tectonic plates.
The late tectonics. Yeah.
Exactly. And these plates are floating on the asthenosphere, which is this semi-fluid churning layer of the mantle right below it.
It's like the ultimate planetary reshuffling, all driven by these massive convection currents deep inside the Earth.
Yeah.
So the Indian plate eventually fractures off from this Gondwana supercluster,
It breaks away from Madagascar and Antarctica.
and it starts migrating north across the ancient Tethys Ocean. And the data here notes it was moving at a speed of about 15 centimeters per year.
Which is incredibly fast in geological terms.
Okay, wait, 15 centimeters a year sounds like a literal snail's pace. I mean, my hair goes faster than that.
Yeah.
How does that translate to the high-speed, catastrophic car crash that the geological papers describe?
Well, you have to separate human time from deep geological time. And more importantly, you have to factor in mass.
Oh, okay.
Yes, 15 centimeters is roughly the length of a pen. To you and me, walking down the street, that's nothing. But imagine a landmass the size of a subcontinent.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
We were talking about billions of megatons of solid rock plunging through the Earth's mantle at that rate. The amount of kinetic energy, like the sheer momentum of that much mass moving steadily northward, is mathematically staggering.
So it's not a car rolling forward.
No, for a continental plate, 15 centimeters a year is a blistering, unprecedented speed.
So it's more like an unstoppable, continent-sized freight train, just silently barreling across the ocean floor for tens of millions of years.
Precisely. And about 50 million years ago, that freight train ran out of ocean. The Indian plate slammed directly into the Eurasian plate.
And because they are both continental crusts, things get incredibly violent. I remember reading that oceanic crust is dense, so when it hits a continental plate, it usually subducts, right?
Right, it slides neatly underneath and just melts back into the mantle.
But the Indian and Eurasian plates are both thick, buoyant continental rock. Neither one is willing to sink.
Exactly. They are way too buoyant to subduct cleanly. So instead of sliding under, they crumble.
Just a massive crumple zone.
Yeah. The immense kinetic energy of the Indian plate literally compresses the rock. The crust buckles, it folds, and it is thrust violently upward.
Yeah.
The sheer physics of this collision took the ancient seafloor of the Tethys Ocean and pushed it thousands of meters into the sky.
Which birthed the Himalayas.
The youngest and highest mountain range on the entire planet.
What's fascinating here and what absolutely blows my mind is realizing that when you visit the mountains today, like if you're standing in Nepal looking up at Mount Everest, you aren't just looking at rocks.
No, not at all.
You're looking at the geological crumple zone of a planetary collision. Millions of years of dynamic, shifting history just frozen in stone.
And it's still happening. Even today, the Indian plate is still pushing northward, and the Himalayas are still growing by a few millimeters every single year.
That is wild.
And that upward thrust, didn't just create a dramatic landscape. It completely re-engineered the planet's atmospheric circulation.
Because the mountains are so huge.
Right. The Himalayas became so massive, so incredibly high, that they physically blocked weather systems. They altered the global climate and essentially created the Asian monsoon system as we know it today.
Wow.
They gathered immense amounts of snow and glacial ice, basically acting as a massive water tower in the sky.
Which perfectly transitions us to the crucial mechanism of survival, because all that high-altitude ice eventually melts, right?
Right, gravity takes over.
The topography dictated that this meltwater had to carve its way down from the peaks, slicing through the rock and fanning out across the northern plains. And the geological data points to the birth of three massive river systems here.
The Ganga, the Sindhu, which we know as the Indus, and the historical Saraswati River.
The lifelines.
Exactly. These rivers changed the entire destiny of the region. Without them, the subcontinent would have had a vastly different, much more arid ecological profile.
You would have just been a desert.
Pretty much. But the constant, predictable flow of glacial meltwater and monsoon runoff transformed the northern plains into this incredibly fertile basin. They were massive flowing arteries of life, essentially preparing the canvas for the arrival of the first humans.
Though arriving took a really, really long time.
Oh, absolutely.
The anthropological data tracks the origin of Homo sapiens back to Africa roughly 300,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And we know the human story is fundamentally one of movement, right?
Right, driven by shifting climates and just the pure pursuit of resources.
Yeah. The genetic and archaeological consensus shows humans making this staggering journey out of Africa, moving along the coastlines of the Arabian Peninsula, and finally arriving in the Indian subcontinent roughly 65,000 years ago.
Just think about the sheer logistical endurance of that migration.
Cave famine.
Generation after generation, slowly pushing into entirely alien topographies. They had to adapt their hunting strategies, their clothing, their foraging habits to literally every new ecosystem they encountered.
I want you, the listener, to really try to visualize the daily reality of that journey, because today we stress out over like bad Wi-Fi or getting stuck in traffic.
Right, minor inconveniences.
But back then, there were no roads, no maps, obviously no GPS, just walking into the absolute unknown. Every single day was a literal, brutal war against death just to secure enough calories to survive.
And the climate models from this period show that the environment was anything but stable.
Which is the crazy part. Humans arrived 65,000 years ago, but they were stepping into an era of severe climatic volatility. Fast forward to roughly 20,000 years ago, and we hit the last glacial maximum.
The absolute peak of the last ice age.
And the specific climate models for the subcontinent during this time are just brutal. We aren't just talking about it being a bit chilly. Massive amounts of the Earth's water were locked up in polar ice caps and expanded glaciers.
Right. And because so much water was frozen, global sea levels dropped dramatically. But more importantly for this region, the climate became hyper-arid.
Very dry.
Extremely dry. That monsoon system we just talked about, it weakened significantly. The rainfall just dropped. Deserts expanded massively, and the lush forests retreated into small, isolated pockets.
So finding resources in a dry, freezing landscape becomes an absolute existential crisis.
Exactly. The carrying capacity of the land just plummets.
Which is exactly why those Himalayan rivers we mentioned, the Ganga, the Sindhu, the Saraswati, became the ultimate geographic cheat codes.
That's a great way to put it.
While the rest of the landscape was turning into this dry, freezing hellscape, these river valleys maintained steady flow of water because they were fed by the high-altitude glacial melt, not just the failing monsoons.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, they functioned as vital refugia, a refuge. Human bands were naturally funneled toward these river basins because water dictates the presence of flora and fauna.
Right, where there's water, there's life.
Exactly. The rivers provided hydration, they attracted the remaining game animals, and they supported edible wild plants. Civilizations always take root near water, because water is the foundational technology for survival.
By congregating around these lifelines, early human populations didn't just avoid extinction during the deep freeze, they actually stabilized.
They finally had a geographical reason to stop running.
Which is huge. Once humans found these predictable, life-giving river valleys and managed to survive the bottleneck of the Ice Age, the global climate eventually started to warm up again.
The ice retreated, the monsoon strengthened.
And with that warmth and abundant water, our ancestors could finally catch their breath. They transitioned from pure panic survival mode to cognitive expression.
And we have breathtaking physical evidence of this cognitive leap right in the center of the subcontinent. Deep in the state of Madhya Pradesh, archaeologists uncovered the Bhimbetka rock shelters.
The dating on these is just staggering. The cave paintings on the walls of Bhimbetka go back 30,000 years.
30,000 years. To put that in perspective, that is tens of thousands of years before the first stone was ever cut for the pyramids of Giza.
Wow.
It predates agriculture, it predates written language. You have early humans seeking shelter in these massive sandstone overhangs, utilizing natural pigments like hematite and manganese, and they're creating art.
See, here's where it gets really interesting to me. What fascinates me isn't just that they drew on the walls, it's the cognitive implication of the act itself.
Oh, absolutely. The theory of mind.
Exactly. To paint a hunting scene or a communal dance, you need abstract thought. You have to experience an event, hold the memory of it in your brain, translate that three-dimensional memory into a two-dimensional representation on a wall, and then assume that another human looking at it will understand your intended meaning.
It is the absolute dawn of symbolic communication. They are no longer just reacting to their environment like animals. They are documenting it. They are externalizing their memory.
Which is just incredible.
It really is. That
Yeah.
shift, the ability to share complex concepts outside of immediate verbal grunts or gestures, is the fundamental prerequisite for complex culture.
And that growing complexity sets the stage for what is arguably the most radical lifestyle change in human history.
Right.
Around 10,000 BCE, the climate stabilizes into the Holocene epoch, which is the warm period we essentially still live in today.
Right.
And we see the onset of the Neolithic Revolution.
The transition from nomadic hunting and foraging to settled agriculture. In the northwestern part of the subcontinent, at sites like Mehrgarh, we see the clear archaeological transition where humans begin actively cultivating specific strains of wheat and barley.
And domesticating animals, right, like sheep and cattle.
Yes, exactly.
I really want to dig into the psychology of this because the moment someone planted a seed, they had to wait for it to grow. The shift from foraging to farming isn't just a change in diet, it's a fundamental rewiring of the human brain's relationship with time.
That's a really good point.
For hundreds of thousands of years, humans operated in an immediate return economy. You hunt a gazelle, you eat it today, you pick a berry, you eat it now. But the moment someone dug a furrow, planted a seed of barley, and walked away, they entered a delayed return economy.
And the cognitive discipline required for that is immense. Think about it. Agriculture demands that you expend massive amounts of physical labor today. Clearing land, tilling soil, planting for a reward you will not see for several months.
Right.
It requires an advanced understanding of seasonality, weather patterns, and, most importantly, the restraint to not eat your seed grain during the winter when you're starving.
I would argue that farming was the literal invention of the future as a tangible concept. And this connects directly to you listening right now. If you contribute to a 401k, or if you put money into a savings account from your paycheck so you can buy a house 5 years from now, you are utilizing the exact same psychological hardware.
Delay discounting.
Exactly. You are engaging in a Neolithic survival strategy every time you delay immediate gratification for a larger future payoff. It's the exact same habit those early humans developed 12,000 years ago when they saved grain.
That is a perfect parallel. And, once that psychological shift occurred, the sociological shift followed rapidly. Because a lone human is weak against predators in nature.
Very weak.
Right. And agriculture anchors you to the land. You cannot plant a massive field of wheat and then just wander off for a season. You have to stay, tend to the crops, and protect them.
Which means you have to build permanent structures. And you can't defend a farm, build a house, and make tools all by yourself. The sheer labor requirement literally forces human cooperation.
It creates a feedback loop of density. Nomadic bands settle down, they form villages. As they refine their agricultural techniques, like using the river flooding to their advantage, they start producing a caloric surplus.
They grow more food than they need just to survive the winter?
Exactly. And that surplus is the absolute catalyst for everything we call civilization.
Because if a few farmers are producing enough food for everyone, then not everyone has to be a farmer.
Right. The surplus allows for the division of labor. You can now support full-time potters, weavers, metallurgists, builders. You develop specialized skills because the existential dread of starvation has been mitigated by the grain silos.
And over thousands of years, those small farming villages in the river valleys just compounded. The population density skyrocketed. The specialized skills evolved into advanced engineering. And it all eventually snowballed into something so massively advanced, so intricately organized, that its sheer scale defies logic. Yet, incredibly, it remained totally hidden under the dirt until a startling, complete fluke of a discovery in the 20th century.
The rediscovery of the Indus Valley Civilization is honestly one of the greatest archaeological detective stories ever recorded. It fundamentally rewrote the timeline of human antiquity.
Let's set the scene for how this actually came to light. The year is 1920. We are in the Punjab region of British-ruled India. British engineers and local laborers are constructing a massive railway line.
Right, they be ballast.
Yeah, they need hard material to pack under the wooden railway ties to stabilize the tracks. So they start digging into these massive dusty mounds in the landscape, and they hit what looks like an endless supply of compacted, fired bricks.
Which is just crazy. And the local workers had actually known about these brick mounds for a long time, right? They were often repurposing the ancient bricks for their own modern houses because the quality was so incredibly high. But the British engineers, completely oblivious to what they had found, used millions of these ancient priceless bricks as railway ballast. They essentially laid miles of train tracks on top of a 4,000-year-old archaeological gold mine.
It makes you wince just thinking about it. Using 4,000-year-old bricks for a train track. But eventually, the sheer volume and uniformity of these bricks caught the attention of the Archaeological Survey of India.
Thankfully.
Under the direction of John Marshall, proper excavations began at a site called Harappa, and soon after, another massive site called Mohenjo-Daro.
And as they dug past the topsoil, the scope of what they found shocked the entire global academic community. They quickly realized they weren't just digging up a scattered settlement of mud huts.
No.
They were unearthing a lost, highly sophisticated urban empire.
The Indus Valley Civilization, peaking between roughly 2600 BCE and 1900 BCE. This means they were contemporaries of Old Kingdom Egypt-like when they were actively building the pyramids and the Sumerians in ancient Mesopotamia. But what the sources make crystal clear is that the Indus Valley was geographically vastly larger than Egypt and Mesopotamia combined.
It's massive.
We are talking about an area covering over 1 million square kilometers, stretching from modern-day northeast Afghanistan all the way through Pakistan and deep into northwestern India.
They identified major urban hubs: Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Dholavira, Lothal, Rakhigarhi. And, the most staggering revelation wasn't even the sheer size of the territory. It was the chilling, almost obsessive level of urban planning.
Oh, this is my favorite part.
When archaeologists mapped the layout of these cities, they found something completely unprecedented for the ancient world.
Right. If you look at ancient cities in Mesopotamia, or even like medieval cities in Europe thousands of years later, the streets are usually chaotic. They are these winding, organic, maze-like paths that just formed over centuries as people built houses wherever they felt like it.
Right, just totally organic growth.
But Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa weren't organic at all. They were rigidly planned on a master grid system. The main avenues ran perfectly straight, north to south and east to west, cutting the city into precise rectangular blocks.
It implies a profound level of civic authority and foresight. Someone, or some governing body, looked at an empty floodplain, mathematically surveyed the land, and laid out a master blueprint before a single private home was allowed to be constructed.
It's a masterclass in urban planning.
Truly. And the houses themselves were often multi-story, built around central courtyards to maximize airflow in the punishing heat.
And those houses were built using the most famous hallmark of the Indus Valley, the 1.2.4 brick. Now, on the surface, talking about the dimensions of a brick sounds like the most boring thing in the world.
Right, it sounds incredibly dry.
But the archaeological data highlights this as a massive technological leap. Across this massive civilization, separated by hundreds of miles, the fired bricks almost universally adhere to a strict ratio of 1.2.4, meaning the length is exactly twice the width and the width is exactly twice the height.
It's brilliant.
But wait, let's really think about the mechanics of this. How do you even enforce that? You don't have a central government with a modern Bureau of Standards, yet a brick kiln in Harappa is producing the exact same standardized construction material as a kiln in Mohenjo-Daro, 400 miles away.
It represents a staggering logistical and ideological consensus. The 1.2.4 ratio isn't arbitrary either. It is structurally optimal for alternating the alignment of bricks, a technique we now call English bond masonry, which maximizes the strength of the wall.
So they were doing English bond thousands of years before the English.
Exactly. And to achieve this uniformity, they had to have standardized measuring tools, standardized molds, and a highly skilled class of artisans who adhered strictly to an agreed-upon mathematical code.
It's basically ancient mass production. It means you can pre-calculate exactly how many bricks you need for a massive public works project without having to custom measure every single wall. But the engineering genius didn't stop with the walls. What really sets the Indus Valley apart from every other ancient civilization is what they built underneath those perfect grid streets.
Ah, yes. Their public sanitation and drainage engineering. It is, without exaggeration, unparalleled in antiquity.
Today, we constantly hear mayors and urban planners talking about building smart cities. And yet, in major global capitals today, we still struggle with waterlogging. A heavy rainstorm can still overwhelm the sewer systems, flooding streets and basements.
It's a modern logistical nightmare.
Exactly. Yet, 4,000 years ago, the Indus Valley had a society where virtually every single private home was connected to a covered drainage system. Every house was equipped with a dedicated bathing area and a toilet, which connected directly to a public network running right under the streets.
And the mechanics of it are just brilliant. The wastewater from the houses flowed through terracotta pipes into small street drains. These smaller drains were engineered with precise downward gradients.
So they relied on gravity.
Exactly. Feeding the effluent into massive brick-lined main sewers. And they used corbelled arches to roof the larger sewers, allowing them to bear the weight of the heavy car traffic above. They even installed strategically placed manholes and settling pools, so municipal workers could periodically clear out the solid waste to prevent clogs.
Okay, stop right there. Municipal workers clearing manholes in 2500 BCE. That completely upends our view of ancient life.
It really does.
It demonstrates that this society fundamentally understood public health. They recognize that when you pack tens of thousands of humans into a dense urban grid, if you don't meticulously manage human waste, disease will absolutely wipe you out.
Yeah.
Their entire city was basically a giant machine designed to move water.
And, water wasn't just the utilitarian tool for waste management.
Yeah.
It held profound cultural or perhaps spiritual significance for them.
Right.
The most iconic structure unearthed at Mohenjo-Daro is known as the Great Bath. It is a large, mathematically precise brick pool situated on the city's raised citadel. And to ensure it didn't leak, the engineers waterproofed the bricks with a thick layer of natural bitumen, essentially ancient asphalt.
And archaeologists generally agree it wasn't just a public swimming pool to cool off in, right?
Right. The layout suggests it was a space for ritual bathing, which implies a shared cultural ideology centered around purification and cleanliness.
Yep.
They weren't just surviving, they were seeking meaning. They had a complex inner life.
But as researchers continued to map out the Great Bath and the granaries and the complex drainage systems, they ran into a glaring absence, a mystery that fundamentally challenges everything we think we know about how human societies scale up.
Yeah, this is the biggest mystery of the Indus Valley.
When you look at their contemporaries, ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia, the archaeological record is dominated by monuments to the ego of rulers. You see massive pyramids built as tombs for god kings. You see giant palaces, ziggurats, statues of despots holding weapons, literally crushing their enemies.
Exactly. It's all about individual power.
So naturally, the early archaeologists digging up the Indus Valley kept looking for the palace. They kept looking for the giant golden statue of the Emperor of Harappa.
And they found absolutely nothing.
Nothing.
Across 1 million square kilometers, spanning centuries of continuous urban occupation, there is a total absence of monumental architecture dedicated to a single ruler. There are no grand palaces, no lavish royal tombs filled with gold, and virtually no depictions of war, armies, or violent conquests in their art.
Okay, so what does this all mean? I have to push back here because human nature usually defaults to a hierarchy. Someone always wants to be in charge. Are you saying a civilization of millions of people self-organized without a centralized authority? Did they actually figure out a classless society? Or at least one without a dictator, thousands of years before modern democracies tried? Could there have been a dictator, and we just haven't found their palace yet?
It's a really fair question, and honestly one that archaeologists debated for decades. This raises an important question about how we view power. But after over a century of extensive excavation, the missing palace theory just doesn't hold up.
Really?
Yeah. The absence of evidence is the evidence. This brings us to a radical concept in anthropology known as heterarchy.
Heterarchy.
Right? It's a system of organization where elements are unranked or possess the potential to be ranked in a number of different ways, as opposed to a strict top-down hierarchy.
Meaning the power was completely decentralized.
Exactly. Some historians believe it was a middle-class, dominated civilization with decentralized governance. The extreme standardization of the Indus Valley, the perfect grid streets, the 1.2.4 bricks, proves they were highly organized. But organization does not inherently require an autocrat.
Right, you don't need a king to tell you how to bake a brick.
Exactly. The archaeological consensus increasingly leans toward the idea that the Indus Valley was managed by a complex network of councils, trade guilds, or perhaps a coalition of wealthy mercantile families. The power was distributed.
That is a staggering realization. They managed to enforce standardized weights and measures across a massive territory without a tyrant threatening them with an army.
Their technology wasn't just physical tools, it was the intellectual concept of organized systems.
Right. The data shows they used these highly specific cubical weights made of chert stone. If you were a merchant selling grain in Harappa, the stone weight you used on your scale was geometrically and mathematically identical to the weight used by a merchant hundreds of miles away in Lothal.
And standardizing weights is the ultimate tool for reducing friction in an economy. It builds trust. If the weights are universally accepted, trade flourishes. It suggests that the authority in the Indus Valley wasn't a person, it was the system itself.
The system was the silent king.
Exactly. The citizens didn't bow to a king. They adhered to the civic and economic code. The rules of their society were baked into the very architecture of their cities and the tools of their trade.
And that system made them absolute economic powerhouses. The archaeological record proves the Harappans were not some isolated utopia. They were the manufacturing hub of the ancient world.
They established what we can legitimately call the first global maritime economy. To manage this, they engineered incredible infrastructure.
Like the docks.
Yes, at the coastal site of Lothal, archaeologists uncovered a massive basin made of baked bricks. By analyzing the hydrology and the structural design, it became clear this wasn't just a pool. It was a sophisticated tidal dockyard.
Wow.
They engineered it to harness the natural ebb and flow of the ocean tides, allowing massive wooden cargo ships to enter, load goods, and exit safely.
And what were they exporting? I mean, they were master craftsmen. The data specifically highlights their carnelian bead industry. Carnelian is this hard, reddish stone. The Harappan artisans developed specialized, hardened drill bits to bore microscopic holes through these tiny stones just to string them into intricate jewelry.
It was an incredibly labor-intensive, highly specialized manufacturing process.
And those beads, along with copper, timber, and agricultural goods, were loaded onto ships and sailed across the Arabian Sea, all the way up the Persian Gulf to Mesopotamia.
We have physical proof of this, too.
Yeah.
We found Harappan seals and etched carnelian beads in the ruins of ancient Iraqi cities like
That's wild.
And we even have Sumerian cuneiform tablets that explicitly complain about or praise the quality of goods coming from a land they called Meluha, which historians widely agree was their name for the Indus Valley.
Today, you open your phone and order something on Amazon from across the world and think nothing of it. Back then, they were managing international oceanic supply chains without a single computer. navigating by the stars and the monsoon winds.
It was a bustling cosmopolitan network. And, it's important to bring this high-level economics back down to the human level. I want you to imagine an ordinary Harappan morning.
Okay, paint the picture.
The sun rises. A person steps out onto a clean, organized street. Artisans are making beads, women are wearing beautiful ornaments, and we know from the artifacts that they weren't just working machines. The excavations have turned up countless terracotta toys.
Really?
Toys! Yes. Miniature carts with spinning wheels, whistles shaped like birds, tiny clay animals with articulated, movable heads that could be pulled on a string. Even thousands of years ago, children were playing. People laughed, worked, and dreamed.
It's the ultimate reality check. We get so caught up in marveling at their grid systems and their tidal dockyards that we forget these were just stressed-out parents buying clay toys to keep their toddlers occupied while they tried to work. They complained about the weather, they cooked meals in their courtyards, they lived entirely human lives.
And structurally, biologically, they are still a part of the human story today. One of the most groundbreaking developments in recent years has been the extraction of ancient DNA from Harappan remains.
Which is incredibly difficult, right? Extracting DNA from 4,000-year-old bones in a tropical, humid climate where genetic material degrades rapidly is an absolute scientific marathon.
It is notoriously difficult.
Yeah.
But geneticists managed to extract usable DNA from the petrous bone, which is one of the densest bones in the skull. It protects the inner ear from skeletons found at the site of Rocky Garhi.
Wow, okay.
And the sequencing revealed a really fascinating genetic profile.
The data shows that the Harappan population was a mixture of deeply indigenous ancestry-like descendants of those original hunter-gatherers who walked out of Africa and settled the subcontinent 65,000 years ago, combined with ancient Iranian hunter-gatherer ancestry.
Right.
But the truly massive takeaway is what happened to that DNA after the cities collapsed.
Exactly. The genetic signature didn't vanish. When you look at the DNA of modern populations across South Asia today, you find significant traces of that exact Harappan genetic profile.
So they're still here.
The people who built the Great Bath, who standardized the 1.2.4 bricks, didn't just disappear into the ether. Their biological legacy, their descendants, are still walking the subcontinent today. We are deeply connected to them.
They survived the end of their world. Which brings us to the ultimate haunting question. How does a civilization this resilient, this mathematically precise, and this geographically vast just fall apart?
The collapse of the Indus Valley is one of the most studied and debated events in all of archaeology.
Yeah.
And to understand the frustration of piecing it together, we have to talk about their script.
Right, the ultimate frustration. The Harappans left behind thousands of small, square soapstone seals. They are beautifully carved with images of animals, bulls, elephants, rhinos, and this very prominent unicorn-like creature. Right. And above these animals is a line of distinct geometric symbols. The Indus script. An advanced civilization that we cannot listen to because their script remains completely undeciphered to this day.
It clearly has syntax. It clearly conveys specific meaning. But despite over a century of intense linguistic analysis and even running the symbols through modern AI algorithms to find statistical patterns, it remains a total mystery.
Why is it so hard? We cracked Egyptian hieroglyphs. We cracked Sumerian cuneiform. Why does the Indus script stump supercomputers?
Because of a complete lack of a bilingual text. Egyptian hieroglyphs were deciphered because we found the Rosetta Stone, which had the same text written in both hieroglyphs and ancient Greek.
And we knew Greek.
Exactly, so we could reverse engineer the hieroglyphs. We have never found a Rosetta Stone for the Indus Valley. Furthermore, the inscriptions we do have are incredibly short. The average seal only has about 5 symbols. There are no long narratives, no stone tablets detailing their history or grammar.
Some researchers have even argued it isn't a true spoken language at all, but rather a system of logographic symbols like modern traffic signs or corporate logos used purely for trade and identification.
Which is a valid theory. But regardless, the result is that they are entirely mute to us. We don't even know the names of their cities in their own tongue. We just use modern names. We don't know their myths.
And because we cannot read their own accounts, we have to rely entirely on the geological and archaeological forensics to figure out how a civilization this great simply vanishes.
And the forensics paint a very eerie picture. By roughly 1900 BCE, the archaeological record shows the city's decaying. The strict enforcement of the 1.2.4 brick ratio starts to slip.
Standards fall apart.
Yeah, the drainage systems aren't being cleaned out. They get clogged and eventually built over. The grand houses are subdivided into smaller, shoddier dwellings. And eventually, the cities are just completely abandoned.
Slowly, quietly. Because, as we noted earlier, there is no evidence of a cinematic apocalypse. There's no thick layer of ash from a massive fire, no mass graves from a foreign invasion, no explosions.
The collapse wasn't an event, it was a process. And the scientific consensus points heavily toward a devastating combination of climate change and tectonic shifts.
Let's go back to the rivers. The entire society was a machine built on the predictable flow of water and the reliability of the monsoon to irrigate their massive agricultural surplus.
Exactly. And the climate data shows that around 4,000 years ago, there was a significant prolonged weakening of the aged monsoon system. The rainfall became erratic and diminished. At the exact same time, the region is highly tectonically active. Geological surveys suggest that minor earthquakes altered the topography of the northern plains.
Which physically changed the slope of the land.
Yes, the rivers literally changed their course.
The massive Saraswati River, which is often identified with the modern Ghaggar-Hakra system, which ran right through the heartland of the civilization, was tectonically cut off from its glacial sources. It began to dry up, turning into a series of seasonal pools before disappearing entirely.
Now apply that environmental shift to a highly optimized, hyper-specialized society. If the river dries up, the farmers can no longer produce a surplus.
And if there's no surplus grain,
You can no longer feed the artisans drilling carnelian beads, the engineers maintaining the sewers, or the merchants sailing to Mesopotamia.
the entire decentralized, interconnected system just begins to cannibalize itself. It's the ultimate paradox of hyper-efficiency. The Indus Valley was brilliantly optimized for a very specific environmental baseline. But when that baseline shifted, their rigidity became their downfall.
They couldn't adapt their massive grid cities to a landscape without water.
So they made the only rational choice available to them. They packed up and left. It was a slow, generational migration. The populations diffused, moving south and east towards the more reliable rainfall of the Ganga Basin and the Indian Peninsula.
The massive urban centers of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro simply emptied out, slowly, quietly, left to the wind, slowly buried by the dust of the failing monsoons.
It is a profound, terrifyingly quiet end to an empire. There was no cinematic battle, just a slow fade to silence as the water dried up. And the historical parallels to our current world, the modern warning here, it's impossible to ignore.
It really is. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this isn't just a history lesson, it's a mirror. It forces us to ask if we are repeating the exact same mistakes that led to the emptying of Mohenjo-Daro.
I mean, are we blindly walking toward becoming the second Indus Valley?
We look at the Harappans and marvel at their inability to survive a shifting climate. Yet we are building massive, sprawling, smart cities made of glass and steel in coastal zones and arid deserts. We rely on hyper-optimized, incredibly fragile global supply chains that can be severely disrupted by a single drought or a single canal blockage.
We assume that because we have supercomputers, satellites, and combustion engines, we are somehow immune to the raw forces of the planet. We assume our technological superiority makes us permanent.
But the Harappans had the most advanced technology of their era. They built their cities out of fired brick, engineered to last centuries. But you cannot negotiate with a drying river.
You really can't.
The illusion of permanence is the great trap of every advanced civilization. The difference is that the Harappan climate shift was driven by natural, orbital, and tectonic cycles. Our current climate volatility is globally interconnected, accelerated by our own actions, and we have the scientific data to watch it happen in real time. The question the Indus Valley leads us with is whether our highly complex systems have the resilience to adapt, or if we are too rigid to survive our own shifting baseline.
It's a heavy, essential realization. Let's take a breath and recap the sheer scale of the epic journey we've just taken. We started billions of years ago with the fiery, violent tectonic collision of the Indian plate, thrusting up the Himalayas and birthing the life-giving rivers. We tracked early human survival, navigating the brutal bottleneck of the Ice Age, finally stopping in those river valleys to invent agriculture and the concept of the future.
Which compounded into the peak of the Indus Valley Civilization, a masterpiece of decentralized urban planning, a smart city civilization with incredible hygiene and a global economy that managed millions of people without the iron fist of a king.
Only to be slowly suffocated by a shifting climate and tectonic changes. But, while the physical cities of the Indus Valley ended, its system and thought process are still alive within us. The people didn't vanish. Their DNA, their knowledge, and their culture diffused outward, blending into the massive tapestry of the subcontinent.
And as the Harappan cities turned to dust, The region was preparing for a massive demographic and cultural shift.
Right. The sources hint that as the Indus cities emptied out, India was about to take a new turn. A new era was on the horizon, introducing new ideas, and a group of people migrating into the plains calling themselves the Aryas.
It represents a fundamental pivot in the historical evolution of the region.
But that is a deep dive for another day. We have covered an immense amount of ground, and I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, lingering thought to mull over as you go about your day. Let's circle back to that idea of absolute permanence. If an entire ancient civilization, one built on mathematical precision, public health, and international trade, could be quietly, entirely erased from human memory simply because their environment changed, what assumptions are you making about the permanence of your own world today?
It really makes you think.
4,000 years from now, when future humans or archaeologists dig through the compacted dirt and ruins of our modern cities, will they find evidence of our brilliance and adaptability? Or will they just find the rusty, fossilized remnants of our fatal mistakes?